What's the perfect grow media? Well, that depends on how you want to grow. So today we're going to be talking about the different grow medias and which one's going to work for you. But before we do, this video is brought to you by Real Growers Recharge. If you want stronger, healthier plants, if you want bigger roots for bigger fruits, you got to check out Real Growers Recharge over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420. It'll get you 20% off your first order for anything in the store. That's Scotty420 for 20% off your first order. And come on, let's talk some grow, High C.
All right, man. So I'm about to start my third grow, and I'm looking at the different options out there, and I'm seeing a lot of different media that I could use to kind of hold my plants in place and maybe get different benefits for different styles of growing.
Hold your plants in place, man. Hang on. We're doing more than that. We got to hold our microbes in place. We got to give the roots a nice environment. The media does a lot.
Okay, so let's get into the different type of media out there for the different styles of growing. And I wanted to start with the first one that I went with, which is called a charged media, and then maybe talk about why I won't be going back to using that again.
You didn't have success with your charged media?
I did not have success with my charged media at a certain point. But first, before we jump into that, what is a charged media for the newbie growers out there?
I'm thinking the most the most popular one is Fox Farm Ocean Forest, and it is one of those grows. I think they tell you to open. You can just cut the bag open and plant right in it, but it's fortified. It has nutrients that are added to it, and they're supposed to slowly release as your grow goes on, which they do, but really depends on the style of grow and how hard you're pushing those plants. If you've got a lot of light, and if you're growing a big plant, or if you've got whatever the environment is, higher temperature, higher CO2, you're going to be pushing that plant harder. And in theory, that nutrient is going to run out faster.
And that's exactly the problem I ran into. I ran out of nutrient about halfway through my grow. I was promised this will keep your plant fed the whole way through. And it didn't. My plant ended up fading out really quick right as I was getting into bloom.
I mean, it's not catastrophic. You can put some more nutrients on there and get the harvest, but it does go against the promise of a water-only soil.
Yeah, and I did not know that you could add more nutrients. The guy who was helping me originally, he just said, yeah, just plant it in this. It'll feed it all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so charged means that they have nutrients kind of injected or added to it,
just
fortified?
Added to them. Yeah, they'll put some slow release nutrients. They'll mix them in there, and they'll slowly break down as the plant is growing.
And usually that is going to be synthetic nutrient?
It depends. No, they're using a lot of organics there. When I think of organics, I'm thinking like the easy ones, like blood meal and bone meal. And those are things like bone meal is ground up bone. It has to be, I guess, weathered or processed. It has to be slowly processed microbially and then made into its ionic form and brought into the plant. So that's cool because it's slow release. You're not going to just overwater and wash those nutrients out. But there's a heck of a delayed reaction there, too.
Okay, so that brings us into the second category. So there's charged soil that might have some synthetic nutrients in it, but there's also charged soil. You called it super soil?
Yeah, there's super soils, and it's a very similar concept to what Fox Farm and the other pre-bagged charged soils are doing. But these usually people will build them themselves. They'll put a lot of organic components in there. Shout out to Jeremy at Build a Soil. That's what he does. And they slowly break down over time. And if you have someone like Jeremy help you design your soil mix for you, usually it's a bunch of components that you buy some peat and then mix in there and add to them. But you get a little bit better design. You could probably talk to some folks and get a better understanding of having the soil fit your grow style. There's a lot of people, they know what they're doing, but they have a lot of success with super soils.
And this is usually preferred by people who like organic growing.
It is an organic thing.
Okay. And you mentioned the slow release, which has its benefits. You don't flood your plant, risk burning it with all the nutrients, but you've also got some drawbacks when there's the slow release. Let me know about that.
It's slow release. So if all of a sudden you see a problem and you're like, oh gosh, I'll see a magnesium deficiency, and I'll throw some Epsom salts, which is organic, ironically, or at least considered so, but very quickly it'll correct the problem. I can come back the next day and it'll correct the problem. If I have a calcium deficiency and I go, hey, let me put some bone meal on here, which is loaded with calcium, that's got to be processed and broken down. That is a solid that has to be assimilated into the plant. And
it's not plant available nutrient off the bat.
Not even close. Yeah. So just fixing problems there right when you see them is, it's going to be a little bit tough with organics.
Okay. And you mentioned it also needs to break down those nutrients
Sure.
and make them plant available. Shout out to Recharge again. Recharge does a great job of doing that.
It does. That's what the microbes process it. The microbes deliver it into that rhizosphere, which is where the roots meet the soil. And then they process it into this ionic form, this plant available form. Plants use nutrients. They can only uptake nutrients in this ionic inorganic form. So all your organics have to be broken down microbially and then converted into this ionic form and then delivered into the plant. The plant doesn't know an organically derived nitrogen molecule from a synthetically derived nitrogen molecule. Gotcha. Sorry, I'm thinking about all the people that are already yelling at me in the comments.
Well, one thing I know, a lot of organic growers swear by Recharge. Our other product, Grow Dots, it's not very favored by organic growers because it's
not organic at all.
It's a synthetic. So if I'm going to grow with synthetic nutrients, what are the different options for media that way?
Pretty wide open there. You can grow with peat, which I prefer to grow with coco myself. Mm-hmm. There's rock wool that's available that's completely inert. It's kind of fallen out of fashion, and coco really does a good job. There's a lot of microbial activity that can hang out in coco, and it has a great air to water ratio, so you can saturate the heck out of it, and it won't hold on to all that water like peat or heavily amended composted soils will. Compost is really heavy like that. So it's one of those things where, what do people do? A lot of times they'll overwater something. I just watered them and now I see a magnesium deficiency. Well, I better get my Epsom salts out and water them again. Mm-hmm. Hey, they still look lousy. I'm going to put some Recharge on there. So people, it's a easy mistake to make. Overwatering. And so, things like rock wool, but specifically coco, really it just has a lot of space in between the particles, I guess. And so there's a lot of air capacity that hangs in there. And when we're talking about microbes, we're talking about aerobic microbes. The anaerobic microbes, the one that don't need air, are the things like Pythium, the root rot things, the bad guys.
So if you get oversaturated, those anaerobic microbes love it, and they'll go and attack your plants. But coco kind of helps protect it by keeping that perfect air-to-water ratio. You mentioned inert. You called coco inert. You called, I think, rock wool inert. Explain what inert versus charged means.
Inert just means there's nothing in it. When you take rock wool, that is spun rock. That is literally rock that just they heat up and spin. So there is no nutrition in there. There's just something to hold your plant. Coco coir, it doesn't really have much nutrient in it. Actually, that's kind of dangerous. I will say just really quick. Buy a good coco coir, something that's buffered, because coco coir doesn't have a lot of nutrient in it. When you feed it nutrient, it can suck it up.
Let's talk about buffered versus non-buffered coco, because I know that you've ordered some cheap coco off of Amazon.
Right.
Found out that it was unbuffered, and what happened?
I had nutrient imbalances. I couldn't get my magnesium, and my potassium were really screwed up. And that's because coco has these sites. It's almost like soils act like magnetic. They have a little bit of magnetic positive and negative charges. So coco was ready to hang on all my potassium, and it was ready to hang on. It had all these open spots for potassium. It had all these open spots for magnesium. So as I would water them in, it would suck them up. And so the idea is you need to pre-charge your soil with these components so that when you actually use your nutrients, they stay plant available and not locked up in that coco.
So buffering, they add a little bit of potassium, magnesium to the coco so that when you pour it on, when you've got a plant in there, it
Right.
can actually make it to the plant rather than getting locked up in the coco.
Correct. Okay. Correct.
All right, and let's talk about the last style of growing, and this one intimidates the heck out of me because it looks like a laboratory almost, and that's deep water culture. Explain
Sure.
what that is.
Hey, my brother just bought a Corvette. I can get you on this one. No, it is like driving around a dragster, I think. That is when you just have a tiny little net pot, and usually they use like a 5-gallon bucket or something similar to that. You have a tiny little net pot, and then you just have in that 5-gallon bucket just air and water, just at the perfect ratio, just a whole bunch. We were talking about air being really good for roots. Well, this is just getting rid of the media and just having this super aerated water mixture, just constantly, the roots are just bathed in it. Mm-hmm. And they seem to, it reminds me of Ivan Drago, if you remember. I'm old, but an old Rocky movie where it was the Russian and he was all chemicaled up and all that. Mm-hmm. It's completely unnatural. There's no media to hold the plant. There's no place for microbes to colonize. There's no place for the nutrients to slowly break down and be stored. It is just on-time delivery of nutrients and water. And if something goes wrong, if a pump clogs up, if you actually have to have the water at a really nice low temperature so it holds oxygen, 68, 69 degrees. So if your water, they call them water chillers, it's an air conditioner for your water, or if your circulation system, or if you have one of your air stones in the buckets that gets clogged, there's a lot of fail points to it. I used to run a lot of these, so it was a pain in the butt. I imagine if you're running 2 or 3 cells of these, it's probably really fun. It's a cool experiment.
Okay, and so to take it back to the media, I've seen when people do this, sometimes they do have like a little, is it a net pot? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, just a little net pot that is filled just to hold the plant up. All that's doing is just holding the plant in place.
Filled with what?
You can use hydroton, a little expanded clay pellets. Sometimes they'll use a little rock wool cube or something in there. But I love how you're fascinated by this because you keep on gravitating towards the media. And the whole thing about deep water culture is there is no media. There is no media. Those little expanded clay pellets, they're doing absolutely nothing. 100% of the action is hanging out and under the water line or in that container. And it is counterintuitive, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned this is kind of the way to turbocharge your grow, but I've also seen people complain about, you kind of mentioned a clogged pump or a clogged air stone. I've heard people say maybe a pathogen or something infects one plant and then it quickly spreads to every other plant.
Sure.
So there's that possibility as well. There is a downside to growing this way.
A huge downside. Don't forget, what are we doing? 3-4 months we're growing these plants for? That's a long time to not have your dragster break down. Something break down in your dragster, you know?
Because it's just going nonstop.
Yeah, and don't forget, you've got all this microbial activity hanging out in your soil, your coco. You've got trichoderma hanging out there. So when a couple pathogens make their way over there, they're just outcompeted by all this really aggressive fungus, this super aggressive trichoderma.
Growing in traditional media.
When you're deep water culture, it's wide open. I call it bare wire. You know, you just got this bare copper wire and there's nothing protecting it.
Okay. All right. So I know you have grown all of these styles.
Yeah.
You've used all of the media and the lack of media that we talked about today. Out of all of that, what's your favorite way to grow?
Coco. Great air to water ratio. It's the biggest mistake, or a very big mistake new growers do, is they overwater their plants. Like I said, they'll have a magnesium deficiency, they'll water in Epsom salts. The plants still won't look right, so they'll go hit them with some recharge the next day, and next thing you know, in peat, they're just oversaturated. There is no air space for the roots or the microbes to breathe, and you got an anaerobic situation. With coco coir, it really does drain out, and as long as you let it drain out, it holds the right amount of water, and it got enough airspace in there to let all those microbes work.
It's forgiving, and it allows you to make mistakes, and then it compensates for those mistakes.
You know, coco is forgiving, and it allows you to make mistakes, and then it compensates for those mistakes. But that is just me. That's the way I grow. But what about you? How do you grow? What is your favorite media? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, press that subscribe button, and check out the other couple videos YouTube's recommended.